So on Tuesday next week, we will have Charles Goodhart, okay? And we will be discussing um, effectively the recommendations of Ben Bernanke regarding the Bank of England and so on. And first point I want to make is that I commend the Bank of England for basically this initiative to basically open up this debate and so on. I think it's a wonderful initiative. Some of the recommendations are coming out in the press, and so one that Asia passed on to me was one that was written by the at the Financial Times last week, and a number of things are coming out in these press reports. One is that the mandate is quite broad, like the terms of reference gets into all kinds of issues, including how does the staff interact with the MPC, what kind of analytical tools and assumptions and so on. So it covers virtually everything that we would consider if we were doing. When I used to work at the IMF, I used to provide a lot of technical assistance to central banks. So it covers everything from policy making to what we would describe as the forecasting and policy analysis system. But I'm sure they won't use that terminology and so on. So I just want to start off. Um, we're just finishing out this week, responding to some of the information that's coming out. Again, Ben Bernanke won't give his recommendation until Friday, but again, much of this information is coming out. One aspect of it is that everybody seems to want scenarios, and of course that is very much in the spirit of FPAS Mark II, or what we describe at the Central Bank of Armenia, the prudent risk management approach to doing monetary policy and so on. And so just to explain a little bit of that background, the project at the Central Bank of Armenia started, I would time it as October 2022, okay, where Governor Galstian presented a working paper that was entitled The Folly in Baselines and Local Approximations, basically saying that we need to have an analytical framework that deals better with non-linearities. So, all this stuff, all this work on linearizing models and estimating, while it's necessary and will remain in our toolbox, we have to spend more time investing in people, developing human capital, so that we can consider non-linearities and, most importantly, the implications of uncertainty in designing policies to guard against what Olivier Blanchard referred to as avoiding dark corners where danger lurks. And what is that? It's not very complicated. The history suggests that central banks should guard against long-term inflation expectations ratcheting up, much like they did in the 1970s, and much like they've been allowed to do again in response to COVID, as we will argue. Not to the same degree. There's still time to prevent the 1970s, but that means developing an analytical framework that is up to the task of dealing with uncertainty and guarding against long-term inflation expectations ratcheting up. At the very same time, the other dark corner that the Bank of Japan and the ECB faced for many, many years before COVID was being stuck in a low inflation trap where long-term inflation expectations were too low, and therefore policy rates were in some sense too low. Okay, the failure to get long-term inflation expectations up to 2% in both the Bank of Japan and the ECB meant that their policy rate was at the effective lower bound going into COVID. So they had less policy space. So we're not talking rocket science here. We don't need complicated models, and we don't need new research. We simply have to be aware of what the history is, not just in the United Kingdom, but across many, many countries, and develop strategies to guard against what I would describe as very predictable policy errors. Okay, so of course that started off the experience of the 1970s with developing what we describe as FPAS Mark I frameworks, where an important principle inside the analytical framework is that there's a fundamental role for the central bank to adjust its instruments sufficiently aggressively to anchor inflation and inflation expectations. Again, guarding against it ratcheting up and the economy losing the normal anchor with positive inflation bias, okay, like the 1970s and potentially now, as well as dealing with deflationary risks like the Bank of Japan and ECB had failed to do. So we just have a little table that separates what we describe as non-FPAS central banks versus FPAS central banks, where the defining characteristic of FPAS central banks is that they organize their internal processes and communications along three essential ingredients. Where is the economy today? Thinking about, what is the uncertainty in our measures of underlying inflation, or our measures of excess demand conditions, or measures of the neutral interest rate. Always trying to study the implications of uncertainty in where the economy is today, and so on. And much related to that question, what are the underlying forces? So again, the underlying forces are related very much to where the economy is today and where it's going in the future. And of course, lastly, in the distinguishing characteristics from FPAS versus non-FPAS central banks is, what do I need to do with my policy instruments to achieve my objectives? To answer these three essential ingredients, one needs to have a model and an analytical framework, not up to academic standards, well beyond that, well beyond academic standards, because it has to be a model that the policymakers see as being a useful device for helping them to organize their discussions, to investigate uncertainty and the implications of uncertainty for policy. So we're not going to go into every aspect of the FPAS Mark I and Mark II system. You can read about FPAS Mark I in the book on the left-hand side, which took stock of the experiences of FPAS central banks. So I published this book with Maury Obsfeld and Tobias Adrian when I was at the IMF. So just before I retired in 2018, we took stock of all the experiences of these FPAS central banks. Now, what we were missing in that book was COVID. And that was a very important thing to miss, because we needed to have an experience like COVID, where we had some stagflationary shocks, to truly test any monetary policy framework. So COVID was obviously bad in terms of the unfortunate consequences it had for many people and so on. But for evaluating monetary policy frameworks, it was vital to sort of separate the central banks that know what they're doing versus central banks that still have work to do developing these frameworks. So I've asked Vosgan just to pick some of his favorite points that he would make to someone that might be working in a non-FPAS central bank, not necessarily the Bank of England, because there are a few other non-FPAS central banks out there. Interestingly enough, they tend to be advanced economy central banks that were all, including the Fed, very late to the game of developing flexible inflation targeting frameworks that started off with a quantifiable target, like 2% in most cases. So most central banks today are FPAS central banks. They tended to be vulnerable open economies or vulnerable emerging market economies, because obviously the benefits of having a consistent and coherent monetary policy framework is bigger when you're facing much more vulnerable types of stagflationary shocks that open economies face every day. So one characteristic of open economies is they all face country risk premium shocks, and this is an example of a type of shock that never goes away, that always has these stagflationary implications. Whereas the advanced economies, it's like they'd forgotten about the 1970s. So I've asked Vosgan to take the lead, and then for the other students to share one thought about advice that they would give to a non-FS central bank that was made starting off on day one of the journey to developing an FPAS framework to support monetary policy. So I understand Voz has his own slides, and so I will stop sharing and let him take the first stab at this. While he's doing that, history has shown that it takes somewhere between 2 to 3 years for a central bank to develop an FPAS framework, and that's if it succeeds. There are examples where the central bank has tried it, never succeeded. So I'm not including those numbers in the sample, but typically all the central banks on the list on the left-hand side in my graph, it typically took about 2 or 3 years to develop the human capital and processes in a central bank. But Voz, please take it away, and then we'll ask the other GFS students just to provide some comments about what advice they would give to a non-FS central bank.
Thanks very much, Doug. I hope you hear me well and you see my screen. Yeah. Okay. So do you hear me?
Here's good.
Yeah, great. So thanks, Doug, for the comprehensive introduction. And what I also wanted to start with was that. So here is my first reflection or my recommendations to any non-FPAS central bank, but particularly to the Bank of England, as to my mind, all these recommendations will very well or super fit for this or for the Bank of England especially. So as you already know, and also Doug mentioned, so last summer the Bank of England asked or announced that Ben Bernanke will lead the review of the Bank of England's policy, the monetary policy, and so on. So during this week or the upcoming one, he's going to provide his review and so all the material on that. But starting the conversation, I will put everyone's attention to the fact that like Bank of England admitted last year that they face like real or serious problems in this regard, and they are going to change lots of aspects and lots of stuff there. But what is kind of confusing a bit to me, with all my respect to the Bank of England, to its like 300 or 3 centuries of history and so on, I would say that what is more important there, so it is important how you see the problem, what you think the problem is, and what's the most important problem is that, for example, if you look at the news release, it is in the left-hand side of my slide, how they announced the news that Ben Bernanke will lead the review. So the title is as follows, as you can see here, that Ben Bernanke to lead review into forecasting at the Bank of England. So I highlighted the word forecasting here. So they didn't write like the monetary policy framework or the policy making processes or anything like that, but rather to lead review into forecasting at Bank of England. And also kind of the court of the Bank of England is pleased to announce that Dr. Ben Bernanke has agreed to lead a review into the bank's forecasting and related processes during times of significant uncertainty. So what is the problem here is, to me, that how you approach your problems. So you see whether the problems are under the models. So like blaming the forecast means like blaming the models or blaming the people, kind of. But the approach here is mainly that the models are wrong, the models were wrong, and mainly they were concentrated on the supply side, on the demand side issues rather than supply side, and they missed some important information during the COVID and so on. So as the models were wrong, the board of the Bank of England were misguided in some sense and did some policy errors. But instead, what I would recommend here is that instead of investing too much into the models and trying to fix the models, I would recommend them to invest in human capital. So I have brought here two very important quotes here. The one, maybe two of the most used ones here at the Central Bank of Armenia and the Global Forecasting School. So the first one is that Stan Fisher told once, quoting also like Paul Samuelson, that I would rather have Bob Solow than an econometric model, but I would rather have Bob Solow with an econometric model than without one. So what it means is that the macroeconomist or the economist is the key here. So we have to invest a lot into economists and to have some complete and versatile economists to be able to face all the challenges and shocks that may hit the economy. And actually, like nobody can predict the especially like COVID-like events and so on, but rather if you have very high quality human capital, you will be able to face that shocks rather than blaming the models. And the next thing is that, as we always say, I think Doug loves it the most. So he always like says, never say model says. So this kind of an approach, I think, is the key under not only FPAS Mark II, but I mean also like everywhere. So the models are kind of tools that work well in a good economist's hands. So you have to use that models to I don't know, to better visualize and show how you think, what do you think, what you forecast, and so on, and keep the consistency between all the stuff. So going a bit into details, I would also want to talk a bit about our system, our dynamic learning environment, and how we train. And as part of the investment into the human capital, I also want to talk a bit about the training of the staff and the system that we employ here at the Central Bank of Armenia, like in full cooperation with the Global Forecasting School. So the structure of the monetary policy department is going to be we are going to have 4 teams, each consisting of 6 persons, and these teams will rotate during the year. So each of the team will be able to have one full forecasting round, forecasting and policy analysis round. So the core production, one quarter it will be a backup for the main production team, and the remaining time will be devoted to the training and development and research. So all of them will be able to have significant amount of time for training and so on. But what is maybe even more crucial here, that the emphasis is put on the economists themselves. So we think, and we believe that the best way to train the economists nowadays is to require from them to become kind of a versatile or a complete economist. So let's bring an example here. So if we compare kind of the football game with the volleyball game, so these are two very different games in terms of team structure and the rotational system. So the FPAS Mark 1 and maybe what the Bank of England also has is very much like what the usual football team's team structure is. So there we have some specific roles and specific positions that any player plays. There we have strikers, midfielders, and I don't know, wingers, goalkeepers, defenders, and so on. But what we have under a typical volleyball game is that they in a game set, they usually rotate clockwise, and any person, any player plays in any role. So they have to be good at serving, at hitting the ball, and blocking, at delving, and so on. So they have to be good at everything. And what we require from the FPAS Mark II macroeconomists is that they have to be good at everything. They have to know macroeconomics from A to Z, and they have to be also playing different roles. I mean, for example, working with the board, or taking the lead in communications, or coordinating the team. So these roles are also rotating, and all of them has a chance and are required to be good at everything. So here, so what I would recommend, having all this in mind into the to the Bank of England, is to invest heavily into the human capital and have some complete economists, instead of having very specialized, field specialized economists as they currently have. Another aspect or another issue that Bank of England was facing, maybe this is the most important issue due to Bank of England, and maybe most of the analysts too, that it has persistently overestimating or underestimating inflation. And so here you can see the Rabobank's Stefan Koopman's review of Bank of England forecasting. So it is their forecasting performance here. So in the right-hand side, you can see that For example, like during the spike of inflation, they were persistently underestimating the inflation, and when the inflation like was ratcheting down, so it was overestimated over that period. So at the first glance, that's a great issue. So the forecast errors are serially correlated, which means that they could be kind of predicted rather than being random. And so the models were kind of flawed in the Bank of England. But what I would recommend here, not to concentrate too much on the forecasts and the baselines, rather to concentrate too much to focus on scenario analysis rather than the baseline scenario. So what's the most important difference here? So under FPAS Mark 1, the Central Bank of Armenia was also like delivering a baseline scenario to the markets, and in some sense, the central bank kind of treats itself or pretends to be an expert forecaster. So but I don't think that's the best way to communicate with the public, especially like all the forecasts are wrong in some sense. And so, for example, here you can see also very different central banks that were very wrong in publishing their, for example, interest rate path. The being wrong in the interest rate path also means that they were wrong, for example, predicting the inflation path or other variables and so on. But what is more important here, coming back to Bank of England, is that rather than giving a false insurance to the public of the most likely scenario, I would recommend them to concentrate more on the scenario analysis. And in that case, for example, under FPAS Mark II, we provide two main scenarios to the public without a baseline. So the case A, which is a plausible hawkish scenario, delivers more so under this scenario, we have more inflationary scenario, obviously. And under case B scenario, which is a plausible dovish scenario, we have less inflationary or like deflationary scenario. And in this case, what you communicate with the public mainly is that you assure, you make them sure that you are prepared, very well prepared, and you are ready to act in any way if we see any kind of risks like risk materialization. We are ready to act, and we will do whatever it takes to bring the inflation down or like up to the target. And so the only insurance we give to the public is that we will deliver price stability here in any way, rather than kind of giving some optimal policy path or some most likely scenarios, or I don't know, fun charts for inflation or GDP growth or something like that, and lose kind of lose credibility, being persistently wrong in underestimating or overestimating the inflation or GDP growth or something or any other economic variables. So these were my main advices or recommendations to the Bank of England. But maybe at the end, I would also like to talk a bit about some maybe funny recommendation in some sense, because as you know, the Bank of England or in general, like British people, the English people are very conservative people. Maybe it is very good or useful in some spheres in their social life, but I don't think that in this case, especially given the changing character of the world and the rising and high uncertainty that we have, we have to be very, very flexible to be able to even change our frameworks and be able to face all the shocks and all the challenges that may come in the future. So these were my main recommendations. If you have any questions or anything to add, I would be very happy to address, or 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 we may give the floor to the girls to share with us their comments.
So just before we go to Deanna and Svetlana and Leah, okay. When you talked about the slide of the six groups of the four groups of six people, okay. So the way that was decided upon in at the Central Bank of Armenia is the idea that it only takes six people to efficiently do everything. Okay. And the idea being that if you have a group that's higher than that has more than six people, you face this massive communication problem. Uh, Whereas six people are, especially if you've trained them, are lots productive enough to be able to do everything, all the current analysis, the quarterly projection exercise, the production of the monetary policy report, and so on. So I think it's really, really important to emphasize that in this system that we've trained people with this dynamic learning environment to be somewhere between 2 and 10 times more productive than what you would see in a typical central bank and so on. And it's designed specifically to do that. But then you have four of these teams. One team does the projection in the first quarter, and while the other team, or one of the other teams, is preparing to do it in the second quarter, and another team's preparing to do it in the third quarter, and another team's preparing to do it in the fourth quarter. So it's like there's a massive investment in both human capital and the analytical framework, developing it to actually put it into practice next quarter. And that process is is continuous. At the very same time, the six-person team has a backup. So if somebody gets sick, you've got that other six-person team there ready to step in, either as an individual or as a group of individuals. So I think it's really important for people to recognize that in a central bank where resources are really scarce, okay, where it's so important to get productivity at really high levels and so on, that this is the framework that we would recommend for central banks where resources are really stretched. Now, in the case of the Bank of England, their budget, their annual budget, just to do monetary policy, not research, not statistics, not financial stability, just monetary policy, and serving the monetary policy committee is 41 million pounds a year. Okay, 41 million pounds. And so my question to Voz is this. If you weren't limited to 24 people, in other words, if you had the budget to scale that up, how would you organize it differently in the steady state, okay, as well as the transition to that steady state? In other words, if I give you enough resources where instead of having 24, in other words, four groups of six, you could have 48, okay, or 72 or whatever. Okay. How would you organize what we did differently, both in terms of the size, about how big it would get, as well as the transition to get there? So it's a surprise question.
Yeah,
Uh, uh, and that actually, Leah, Svetlana, Deanna, you might also comment on Vaz's answer to this question, like because it implicitly it's a really good question because effectively it sort of tells you why we've designed it as four groups of six in a country where resources are really limited, because effectively you'll be talking about what the potential contribution of additional resources might be, both on a really big scale, which of course advanced economy central banks would have absolutely no problem financing because they have humongous budgets, for supporting this, this kind of policy analysis. But Voss,
yeah,
you got the first go,
yeah,
and then we'll see what Leah and Svetlana and Deanna come up with.
yeah. Thanks for the question. So that's a really good question. So, but my answer like wouldn't be very different from what we have now. I think in a steady state, a 6-person team is really enough to address so to do all the stuff, all the current analysis, the scenario building, the monetary policy report, the drafting, I mean, and so on. I think that's enough. But maybe like in a transition period, maybe these teams could be a bit bigger, maybe consisting of 8 people. I don't. I'm not speaking even about 10 people. Maybe like in a transition period, these teams could be a bit larger. I mean, but gaining the experience and coming to the productivity levels that we want to come, like gradually we will come up with 6% teams in a steady state. But on the other side, what I also would recommend, as if we have that kind of money to invest into our monetary policy department, I would spend that money on capacities. I mean, kind of statistics to data, because in we as you know, Armenia is not a really data-rich country. I would spend some part of that money and invest into the statistics, into some making some service or collecting some micro data, because during our current analysis or research, uh, there are like lots of times we face that data problems and so on. But like regarding the team structures, the rotational system, I think this is, to my mind, this is perfect.
That's very interesting because it effectively means that if it gets too big, it becomes extremely inefficient, right? But
Yeah.
but there's Highcast. I don't know if he's on. What he said, is it just double it? Okay, take it from 24 to 48. And but I don't know if I think you'd be okay with this. He wants to have what he calls a full backup in the sense that the 6-person team has another 6-person team, and they clearly know that they're not responsible. Okay, that they're simply helping the 6-person team that is responsible. And so you could just think of this other 6-person team as being supportive, okay, but where there's a clear line of responsibility and accountability on this 6-person team. And of course, uh, you could use that team because they would effectively be doing it. You'd be duplicating effort in some sense because you'd have too many resources. But you could use them also as a backup. Somebody gets sick, someone stepping in like right away, kind of thing, right? But so, but you're absolutely, I think you're absolutely right that if you made it a 12-person team, then you'd have the coordination problem again about getting everybody on the same page, and of course
Yeah.
that
I mean, not
but
only coordination problem, but also the rotational system will be very weak in that sense, because we want people to be to have a chance to do anything, kind of to play any role, and to for example, in one quarter they may be analyzing like the fiscal policy, in another they will be specializing in financial markets. For example, if we have lots of people here, for example 10 people, it will take too much time for any person to be able to get a chance to work in any field, every field, and to play every role uh, in the team. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
in
okay.
that sense, I think 6% is also good in that sense.
So Leah, uh, Deanna, Svetlana, notice Narc's on the line as well, but what are your thoughts about this? So we've got Vosgin's view that 624 is good for everybody. That's the way to organize this. And then you've got Highcastle's view of doubling it. Okay. But then be very careful about what the roles are so that you don't run into the problems because you might not be able to solve them. I mean, I think that Voskin has a very, very important point that as soon as you make it bigger, there will be a tendency for specialization. Okay, and that tendency for specialization uh, could actually destroy the productivity of the team to basically just come up with good answers to common sense answers to the kinds of questions that they're not doing so well at, probably because they're too specialized and too buried in the details and the weeds and so on. But Svetlana, Diana,
Yeah,
Leo, Nora, what are your views?
if I may, Doug, a short comment on this. Uh, I wouldn't insist on certain numbers, of course, and obviously both Vazgen and Haikas are not doing this, but in terms of small or large group, if you think like this, I think of a smaller group, smaller teams will be very effective in the initial building stages. Once the system is built and everything is set up more or less, when we can afford ourselves widening it and letting in more and more people. So just to give you a sense what I'm saying, if you remember, me, Arman, Haik, and Shahane renewed FPAS Mark 1 in the Central Bank of Armenia. And this is a small, well, if it was lots of us back then, I think we would fail. So it's very productive to spend these resources in the investment stage, work 24/7, and then do this investment. And in the initial stages, where we are now, actually, we are in a very similar situation. Keeping it small will be more productive. And then we can add more specialized people and let this happen. So these are my views. Thank you.
You could also, Narek, you could also think of those additional people, okay, not being in this system. Like they could be in research or, in other words, so we're not, you could basically replicate exactly the same ideas for research, okay, and say, okay, for research where the specialization really matters, now we can have lots of size and so on. So we just wanted to kind of like what Vosga and I are talking about is specifically to manage the forecasting and policy analysis system. There could be tons of people working on research, okay, where you could take those resources and maybe deploy them effectively there. But so we're just worried more about when it becomes too big. Okay, like Edward. So Dark, maybe you could
Yeah, I'm on the
answer
same
that
line with
question.
you on this. Yep.
Because we just want to know when, like Voz's point, I think is very good one that be careful about getting too big because the productivity will be affected because we need to have people that have a sufficient specialization. I should be clear about that as well because the level of specialization that we're requiring for what our generalists are, they have to get to level one, they have to pass advanced macro policy modeling 1 and 2, and that's, understanding nonlinear models, understanding mixed complementarity problems, understanding Bayesian inference theory, understanding, I would say things that are uh, certainly above average for what a specialist would know in a central bank, non-FPAS central bank. Now, of course, it's not as specialized as lots of people in non-FPAS central banks, but one might question, how valuable that research is without having a basic framework for monetary policy to organize it all.
Oh yeah.
So I would, so I want to make that really clear that our generalists are up to pretty high standards of specialization, in terms of solving nonlinear models and doing current analysis and so on. So I just wanted to now Leah, Svetlana, Deanna, you guys are a bit different in the sense that you're not like Narek and Voskin and me that have a long history of doing this stuff. So you're more coming at it more from the people just starting. But it'd be great to. What are your views, Leah and Deanna and Voskin and Svetlana?
Thanks, Doug. I think that six-member team is perfect because I will mention the same thing that you said before entering the production team. Everyone is going through trainings, and all the people in our production in every group are trained enough to do some production and to do some research. So, and also these rotations of roles in our department is also allows us for a broader understanding of policy making beyond tasks like GDP or inflation calculations. So I think that these six-member teams are perfect.
Okay. So maybe Voz, you said that you wanted 8 at the beginning. So maybe you could just explore that a little bit.
Yeah,
Voz, because
maybe, like I meant, for what we are going to have in a steady state or when we are in a steady state, and about the transition period to the steady state. So I meant when, for example, in some after some time we will have maybe at least like 12 or 18 like level 1 or level 2 economists. Economists that meet our standards of level 1 or level 2, then as we have them, like the 6-person teams are great. But before that, like in the transition period, as we are having like heavy trainings and so on, and we are also having lots of new people entering the Central Bank of Armenia, the monetary policy department. So I mean that in the transition period, maybe it will be more. It will be more proper to have a bit larger teams, maybe 8-person teams, to be able to bear the burden of the policy analysis, I don't know, forecasting, the scenario building, drafting, and so on, not to put that much like work to do for 6 people, rather to share with them, so to have maybe 8 people in a team, but like gradually as the productivity rises and they are better trained and they are more experienced, they get more experience. So maybe we will, maybe 6-person teams will be perfect in a steady state. Maybe, for example, the same 24 people we can divide in 3 teams, for example, to have 3 teams by 8-person, and gradually like become 4 teams with 6-person.
Okay, and back to the transition issues, okay, but that raises a very interesting question. If you got 24 people, why 4 groups of 6 versus 3 groups of 8? Okay, so that's now part of this, right, is that once you have 12, okay, that additional 6 is backing up the first 6, right? So and on the volleyball team, like if something happens to one of your players, effectively, since they're backing up, they can just plug them in, right? But in addition, there are certain tasks where if people are doing research on a topic, non-traded sticky price inflation or Miriam's consumption functions and stuff, she's naturally going to be the person that writes the box on that particular topic because, even though she's not on the production team, she's doing all this research to help promote monetary policy. So my question to you, Vaz, is that, like, when you think about it, we haven't had that 6-person team that was like a backup. We've just been using fill-ins, like yours truly and stuff. But once you have that, are you sure that you'd still want 8 people? Because
No.
you can.
Yeah. Yeah, the answer is no. Once we get to that,
Okay.
I think the 6-person team with another like 6-person backup teams, for me, that's really enough and perfect for
Yeah,
all
that's
the
the perfect.
purposes. Yeah.
Okay. Deanna, Svetlana.
Yes, thank you for the question. Let me say that it's somehow also very thought-provoking for me, because I think that the small number of team, especially during the beginning and during the transformation time, is much more helpful, because this is some additional stress that that no one will back up you. You are alone and you have to deal with every topic. It means research, it means report, it means, I don't know, even graphs, everything and you have to deal with everything, and you have to improve your skills in a very short time, because that's why I think that maybe during the transformation part, the small number of team will help us to play with our best strengths. I think maybe it can help us, because during the work, when I during one month I had to create ECB version of Notified Till book. I think I learned much more because I don't have any backup, anyone who can help me, and the time was very short. So I think I learned much more than I can do with additional support, with someone who can help and cover me. I think in some part, maybe small numbers are the best solution for for the team. So this is
Like-
what I want to say.
Like, so what you're saying is like, for example, for training, okay, 6 might even be too many, right? Because you know, sometimes 2 is the best way to have, you know, people active, right? And of course, when you're exploring and you're doing something completely new, the idea that you'd start off by saying, I want to have 12 people working on this. I mean, good luck. That project would never succeed. It'll never get anywhere. You have to find, you know, maybe 2 or 3 people, maximum, I would say, 2 or 3 people maximum to basically start it off. And then, as Nark said,
You know
flesh it
that
out. Yeah,
that
sorry.
there is a joke on this kind of like research groups. So they say that for a research group, like 1 is too small, but 2 is too much already.
Yeah.
So Svetlana, are you what are your thoughts? So is
Okay.
6 the perfect number? Like 7, come on. I mean, it's pretty clear that Voss does, you know, if it's defined properly, 8 is too many. But why not 7? Why not 5? What are your views?
So it seems that if the team members have some experience with similar projects, or if they have some experience in joining the rounds, projection rounds, so a team of 6 or maybe 7 or 8 can handle it well. But I think that if there are some newcomers or who haven't been involved before, so it might require some more time and more resources compared to team where everyone has prior experience. So, however, I think that new things are learned and applied during teamwork, and smaller teams tend to collaborate more effectively. So I can't mention the number for a team that will succeed in these projection rounds, but I think that the background and the experience in this field will help team members to handle the work well.
Good. So, are there any other pieces? Remember, we have next Tuesday, we're going to have Charles Goodhart. And so we're going to try and provide a comprehensive assessment in that seminar, as well as a follow-up seminar in May about what the actual Bernanke recommendations are, as well as how other people have reacted to those recommendations. So it's right on the money. It's exactly 3 o'clock in Portugal right now, and 6 o'clock, which according to our work-life balance issues, is the time for us to end the seminar. Okay, so thank you very much for all the contributions, and thanks, Narek, for stopping by.
Thank you. See you next Tuesday.
See you guys.